Greetings and thank you for joining me. My name is Daniel Ray. I am a staff apologist with Watchman Fellowship in Arlington, Texas. You can visit our website at watchman.org for more information about what we do. This is another video in my ongoing series and engagement with street epistemology. This one is called Atheism, Street Epistemology, and the Atheist Interlocutor, How Street Epistemologists Engage Religious Believers. I'm going to be taking a look at a video that came out 6 years ago, a street epistemology conversation from 2016. Brianna is the person being interviewed. She was a Christian student at the University of Texas in San Antonio. The interview was conducted by street epistemologist Anthony Magnabosco, who is now the executive director of Street Epistemology International, a 501c3 organization. Street Epistemology International was formed in 2019 by Anthony himself. You can see the video, Who Defines Street Epistemology, for more details about that. Anthony was inspired to do street epistemology by atheist and philosopher Peter Boghossian's 2013 book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. Since 2013, street epistemology has evolved to discussing topics other than religious faith. Yet, it is my contention that when street epistemologists engage religious believers, nothing much has really changed since 2013. This is a tweet I found on Twitter. Street epistemology as a way for an atheist to sneakily challenge Christians. This person says, my boyfriend is obsessed with street epistemology, which is the practice of interviewing strangers with specific non-confrontational questions about their beliefs, and the means they use to determine that their beliefs are true. It's pretty cool and wholesome usually, but it's funny to hear him, my boyfriend, listening to an atheist basically sneakily challenge Christians while he's in the shower. This is relaxing to him, and this is again from February 8th, 2022. Her boyfriend is listening to an atheist basically sneakily challenging Christians. One of the main foundational tenets of Street Epistemology International is, quote, encouraging and normalizing skepticism. Here is their purpose outlined, and you can see it here. Street Epistemology International was formed to encourage and normalize critical thinking and skepticism. And this is on the Street Epistemology International website, streetepistemologyinternational.org. Street epistemology is not a neutral conversation technique. In the fall of 2021, Anthony is discussing SE as a means of creating doubt in believers and the idea of believers deconverting because of street epistemology conversations. He seems rather delighted about the prospect. In this clip, Anthony mentions he's volunteered taking calls for RFR, which is the organization Recovering from Religion.
I was wondering if Recovering from Religion would have stats. Like, are they seeing more and more people calling, or less people, or the same? Like, if we're noticing more and more people deconverting or lowering their confidence in the truth of the claim, we should see maybe like a proportional increase in the number of people reaching out. However, if it's becoming culturally acceptable to not believe, I've taken phone calls at RFR. There are 90-year-olds, there are 80-year-olds that call in and they're struggling because in the last 10 years they realized that this isn't true. And then there are people that they deconverted 50 years ago and they still have legacy fears of hell and all this other garbage.
Right.
On Twitter, Anthony recently supported the fundraising efforts of Recovering from Religion. Now, in this interview, Anthony is a bit aggressive in his going after Brianna's faith here. Anthony has softened somewhat in his approach since then, but his atheism has not. Causing doubt seems to remain his goal to this day. A comment under the video with Brianna prompted me to do this video, and if you scroll down underneath this video, you will see this. Cape Cod Audiovisual, just a year ago, said, I feel a little sorry for her. You could tell at the end, her defenses against reason and logic went up, shields up. But in 10 years, she'll be voting to criminalize abortion, put immigrant children in cages, and teach creationism in public school. Good try, Anthony. And again, this was just a year ago, and Anthony loved the comment. He put a little love reply there. And this is, again, just a year ago. Anthony loved this comment. So at the 2:22 mark, Anthony tells Brianna what his interviews are mostly about: talking to people who believe in gods.
What I'm doing is just interviewing people, particularly people that believe in gods, to find out the reason why they hold the belief. Have you ever thought about, like, what's the main reason why I believe in this God?
Yeah.
You have?
I have.
Why?
Absolutely.
What's the
He's very personal to me.
Yeah?
God has shown up in my life in ways that I can only explain by the fact that he is ultimate power.
The first question Anthony asks Brianna focuses on the main reason she believes. It is a very common SE question. Street epistemology practitioners, or what we will refer to as the SEPs, will attempt to isolate that main reason and then try to cause the theist to doubt it. So at 2:33, Anthony will ask this question: what's the main reason why you believe in God? Brianna gives her testimony and concludes that she believes in Jesus by faith. But faith is a trigger word for SEPs. More on faith from an SE perspective later. Anthony brings up a Hindu with whom he had recently spoken. This is at 6:24 in the video. This is the outsider test for faith. And using Hinduism is something often mentioned in SE conversations, usually by the Hindu god Vishnu. You'll hear that name often brought up in these conversations. Brianna, at this point, seems like she's starting to suspect Anthony's challenging her beliefs.
Let's say that the next person walking by is like a Hindu.
Yeah.
And I actually talked to one yesterday, he believes in 3 different gods. But let's say that we did find a Hindu who said that he uses faith to be confident that his gods exist. And just, I believe it and I really feel it, and I feel it strongly enough, even though I can't see it, and I know that it's true. How might a person differentiate the faith that he's using from the faith that you're using?
The relationship aspect. You ask them, do you have a personal relationship with your God or your gods? Because I've actually have studied other religions and I've interacted with people of other religions. I spent 3 weeks in Turkey last summer where...
What city?
Well, actually, I traveled to villages and towns, but we started in Istanbul, and 99% of the population is Islamic.
Yeah.
But you talk to them and you start talking about, I would tell them about my personal relationship with God, and the looks on their faces were stunned. Like, you can't have a personal relationship with God, you can only serve him.
Yeah.
And serving God is important to me.
Did they not believe you?
No, they did.
They believed your personal experience?
They did.
A little aside here on the outsider test for faith, of which I have a little personal experience. The Outsider Test for Faith is a book by atheist John W. Loftus. He wrote this in 2013, the same year that Peter Boghossian's A Manual For Creating Atheists came out. John's thesis is that if Christians really challenged their own faith as they do other religions, they would become atheists. Now, thinking critically about your faith is fine. We can actually find a point of agreement with John. We should all examine what we believe critically. But Loftus's book is more than just that. It's aggressive atheism, very much in the same tone as Peter Boghossian's book. Now, we featured John live with us on our Atheist and Christian Book Club in September of 2019. Loftus has since co-edited and contributed to the book Varieties of Jesus Mythicism with mythicist Dr. Bob Price. Loftus does not believe that the Jesus of the Bible ever existed. But John refused to read Bart Ehrman's book, Did Jesus Exist? Dr. Ehrman is an atheist, and Ehrman's book flatly contradicts Loftus's belief that Jesus of the Bible did not exist. John would not apply his own outsider test for faith to himself. Have a look.
And so Bill was explaining this outsider test of faith, and how many of us have heard of that and this kind of thing. And the irony was, as we looked at each other, every one of us were the opposite of that. So Bill himself is a former Christian who's now an atheist. I'm a former Mormon who's now a Christian. Frank Turek is a former atheist, now Christian, and you are a former Christian, now atheist. And so it's just like, there's a whole lot of people that kind of break that rule, wouldn't you say?
Well, I don't know that people break the rule for reasonable reasons. I mean, for good reasons. I mean, there are people becoming Christian in Asia and the southern hemisphere by the boatloads. I mean, but I don't think they're coming to Christianity out of whatever they're leaving from good reasons.
But you would argue that nobody becomes a Christian for a good reason.
Well, of course I would. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But here's the reason. I mean, because we're looking for sufficient objective evidence commensurate with the claim. And the outsider test asks people to do that. They ask people to do to their own faith what they do to the faiths they reject. You know. And,
let me get you to do one thing for me. That's
just switch.
A major part of our discussion tonight is going to be on this outsider test of faith. So from the author himself, and I think you're the one, not just that wrote the book on it, but you basically kind of pioneered in this whole area, best I can tell. Could you just give us a really succinct definition from your own lips of the outsider test of faith?
Well, the basis of it is the fact that now we know a whole ton of cognitive biases that affect us all. The mother of all cognitive biases, I argue, is faith itself, but the psychologist community probably won't go with that. But if that one doesn't work, then the mother of all cognitive biases is confirmation bias, where you seek to confirm that which you prefer to believe. And I do that because and Christians say, well, I really don't want to believe in Christianity. It says I'm a sinner, I'm going to hell. But you really do. You just don't. You're just trying to deny it because I brought it up. That's all.
Well, let me ask you this: Do atheists ever have confirmation bias? Any atheists?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I already said that. We all have confirmation bias. We're looking for that which confirms what we believe. And that's back to what I was saying earlier. What we have to do, if we want to be honest, is we have to actively seek for disconfirming faith. Now, there's disconfirming evidence for what we believe. And the people just don't do that because they are infected with a virus called cognitive bias.
Here's my question in a nutshell from those two clips, okay? So this outsider test of faith that you pioneered, okay? Two of the elements of it is you do with their own faith what they do with the faiths they reject. And then you also said another point of that we have to actively seek for disconfirming evidence. I would agree, okay? Now, the question is, don't you violate your own rule? Because Bart Ehrman has written a scholarly book that I think does a great job of completely taking apart any kind of support of mythicism. And you refuse to look at it. You're not actively seeking to disconfirm the evidence that you want to believe. And
it has nothing to do with what we want to believe. I said I would be eager to see that book.
See, even Aaron is willing to read the book. So here's my challenge. Would you be willing to read Did Jesus Exist by Bart Ehrman?
I have the book in my library, including almost all of his books.
But read it.
And I've read about half of them. I haven't read that one.
Okay. You said you didn't want to, and you refused to believe anything because you said Jesus almost certainly did this.
There are certain things that I'm not interested in. You grant that, right?
Yeah.
Right.
God.
I'm not really interested in whether Jesus exists or not.
But Loftus's outsider test for faith is a favorite with SEPs when talking to religious believers. Anthony presses this quite aggressively with Brianna. It comes up several times in this conversation. Brianna shares her experiences in engaging people of other faiths. She does this at the 7-minute mark, where she explains some experiences she's had in talking to people of other religions and beliefs. Now, as I said a moment ago, faith to an SEP is a kind of trigger word. Anthony hints Brianna's faith might be wishful thinking or a delusion. Now, that comes directly out of Peter Boghossian and John Loftus's books. They believe faith in God is irrational and indeed a delusion. At 8:06, Anthony asks Brianna how she differentiates her faith in Jesus from wishful thinking or a delusion.
How can you differentiate this experience that you've had from wishful thinking or perhaps a delusion or something like that?
Because I kind of did live with wishful thinking for most of my life. Because I hadn't asked for a personal relationship with God. And once I have it, I talk to him about everything.
But here's what Loftus and Boghossian have to say about faith. In a Manual for Creating Atheists, Peter Boghossian notes, quote, "It is critical," and that italics is in the book, "that the religious exemption for delusion be removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. That is the guidebook for practicing psychologists and psychiatrists in diagnosing mental disorders. Boghossian says, once religious delusions are integrated into the DSM, entirely new categories of research and treatment into the problem of faith can be created. Removing the exemption that classifies a phenomenon as an officially recognized psychiatric disorder legitimizes research designed to cure the disorder. And that's found on page 222. In John Loftus's book, The Outsider Test for Faith, Loftus notes, quote,
Yes. Because
faith-based reasoning is irrational. And that's found on page 228 of his book. And as late as the fall of 2021, Anthony seems to agree with this. In this video, he says, quote, the downside might be we, perhaps Street Epistemology International, need to hire a hell of a lot more psychotherapists. And you can see the full context of that clip here.
Well, the downside might be we need to hire a hell of a lot more psychotherapists because these beliefs are filling, I think, psychological needs for a lot of people.
Note the atheist street epistemologists' reactions to Anthony's comment. One of the panelists, Mark, of the Being Reasonable podcast, is a former clinical psychologist and says nothing about Anthony's comment. Reed is the president of Street Epistemology International. So it appears the executive director of Street Epistemology International, as well as the president, plus a few other SEPs, believe that people who have faith in God might need psychotherapy. Boghossian defines faith as a slippery pig. He says, quote, the word faith is a very slippery pig. We need to get our hands on it, pin it to the ground, and wrap a blanket around it so we can have something to latch onto before we finally and permanently subdue it. Malleable definitions allow faith to slip away from critique. And that's found on page 23. In January of 2021, Anthony spoke with Peter Boghossian. In that conversation, Anthony said faith is twisted and that it's simply just wishful thinking.
So there you are, you're looking at this rickety old bridge, and you say to the guy, hey man, is this safe? And he's like, well, I desire it to be safe.
Yeah, and I desire all those goods that are on the other side of the chasm that I'm like, that's where I want to go.
Right. I mean, if somebody told me that they desired that the bridge is going to hold my weight, I would thank them, but there's no way I'm walking across the bridge, right?
Unless it could be tested and demonstrated before you walk your ass out there.
Yeah, so you'd have to have a fat person that walked over and the bridge didn't collapse, right?
But here's what's so twisted about faith is that it's viewed as a virtue to believe that that bridge will hold you without being able to test it.
Right.
And I'm a good person because I'm taking on faith that the bridge will hold me. I'm taking it on faith that the God will be there. I'm taking it on faith that I'll see my grandpa and my uncle again when I die.
And notice how interesting that is. It shifted from an epistemological claim to a moral claim. It shifted from, I have evidence for this thing, therefore I believe it, to I'm a good person if I believe it.
Right.
So it's from epistemology to morality.
When the very question is, how are you concluding that it's factually true?
Right.
So the method is because I want it to be true.
Right.
So there remains to this day an ideological relationship between a Manual for Creating Atheists and Street Epistemology. SEPs will be vague about this ideological relationship. Some will deny it, some remain ambivalent, some avoid it, some remain nonspecific, and some SEPs haven't even read the book. But on the streetepistemology.com website, they have a document that was created in May of 2018, and in that document, you'll find this on the resources page. A Manual for Creating Atheists is a must-read for anyone interested in conducting street epistemology. Now, I make clear the date of this. The Street Epistemology website has been updated. I do not know, as of the making of this video, if this document is still on the website, but it was on the website just a few months ago. But the document itself, where you'll find this quote, was created in May of 2018. But if people deconvert and leave their faith, perhaps because of an SE conversation, What will street epistemologists do for them? Anything? Should they? It is what Anthony does not say here. He doesn't say you shouldn't use SE to try to cause doubt in the minds of believers. He seems rather to encourage and even celebrate the idea.
The downside might be we need to hire a hell of a lot more psychotherapists because these beliefs are filling, I think, psychological needs for a lot of people. So there needs to be, like to Daniel's point, what's the alternative if you decrease, I'm not decreasing your faith. You are doing it on your own through the course of me asking questions, by the way. But yeah, what is the replacement for church or going to the temple or going to the mosque for a lot of people and thinking that there's this lovely father figure out there protecting you and you're going to see your loved ones again? That's a real big question that we as humanists, as atheists, as skeptics need to consider. So as the number of people who are religious decrease, I think I've said this before, our responsibility to come up, maybe is it our responsibility, or should we be like waving our flag like, hey, this is happening, folks, let's start shifting gears here. We need to have resources in place for these people as they start lowering their confidence in this claim, because that's going to start happening. It is already happening.
What about the mental health of the interlocutor? One street epistemologist on this panel declined to have an SE conversation with me. He said he heard I had clinical depression. I never talked to him about that. He said he had ethical concerns about challenging my faith. But in his videos with believers, he has a few, he does not inquire about their mental health before he begins challenging them. Why not? Another panelist here interviewed me for almost 6 hours in 2 separate interviews. He never asked me about my mental health. So when it comes to talking to religious believers, it seems many SEPs use SE as a way of subtly or not so subtly promoting atheism and skepticism. Now back to our video with Brianna. Anthony continues to press scenarios to cause Brianna to doubt and question her faith. Is he concerned for her mental well-being? At 10:45, Anthony asks Brianna, what if you're just talking to yourself? And at 10:58, Anthony makes another wishful thinking comment.
But like, what if you're really just talking to yourself and these are just items coming up in your mind? How do you know for sure that this is just not your wishful thinking and it's really this God coming into your heart?
Now, the questions themselves are not bad, but when you add them into the mix of what street epistemology is all about, promoting skepticism according to the SEI website, then the question takes on a different meaning altogether. Brianna tells Anthony that she can't think of anything that would change her mind about her belief in God. Anthony is clearly not satisfied with her answer and subtly suggests she's, quote, not willing to entertain something that would change her mind on it, end quote. At 15:18, Anthony asks, quote, what would lower your faith, end quote. This is a very common question for SEPs engaging believers. Oftentimes the question takes the form of, what would lower your confidence in your belief in God?
What would lower your faith?
At this point, nothing would. Nothing that happens in my life would lower my faith. And I can say that with 100% certainty. And it's not something that I could explain to just anyone necessarily, because if they don't see that or they don't have that same faith, then it's really hard to explain. I have the Holy Spirit inside of me, and that's something that may be a little difficult for people to understand, but I do.
I'm not sure if I asked this before, so forgive me, but if maybe I did ask this. You've got this belief, you're extremely confident that it's true, to the point where you're walking up to strangers and telling them, hey, I was told to come pray with you or whatever. If this belief really was just in your mind, and it's not true, how could you ever figure it out?
If it wasn't true? How would I figure out if it wasn't true?
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's a question I can answer, because I know that it is true.
Do you hold other beliefs that you're absolutely certain are true and you're not willing to entertain something that would get you to change your mind on it?
I don't think so. I go to a public university, and I've had many interactions with people who believe way differently than me.
At 16:18, is Brianna not willing to entertain other beliefs that would challenge her faith? Up to this point, Anthony has not said anything positive or supportive about Brianna's faith. I think she realizes what he's doing. So if you watch the whole video, and I will link that in the description notes below, you will see that Brianna is very confident about her faith in God. She is bright and articulate. She has given a defense of her faith with gentleness and reverence. Her faith in Christ clearly gives her meaning, fulfillment, peace, and joy. So the question is, why would a street epistemologist try to take all that away from someone? Why would they cause someone who is clearly stable and has meaning and joy and peace and fulfillment and can give a defense for their faith? What's the point in trying to undermine all that? What's the purpose? Again, if we go back to the streetepistemologyinternational.org website, we see what the purpose is. Street Epistemology International was formed to encourage and normalize critical thinking and skepticism. Once more, Anthony attempts the outsider test for faith. At 17, he goes back to the Hindu example. Brianna responds by saying she would have a discussion with the Hindu about the character of their gods. Anthony says, let's not even get into that. So at 1750, you can hear Brianna give that answer. And at 1752, you can hear Anthony quickly reject it.
And says, Anthony, you know, I'm absolutely certain and he said Shiva and Brahma and some other gods. Like, I'm certain these three gods exist. And I can never discover anything that would cause me to change my mind. Do you think that's a healthy position to take on a belief?
I mean, in a way, that's the position I'm taking. But I would say that you would then have to ask about the character of those gods.
Maybe let's not even get into that.
This gets into the avoid facts aspect of street epistemology. Do street epistemologists avoid facts? Yes. In my experience, many SEPs have avoided getting into the details of comparative religious studies, especially when they find out that's what I do for a living. They will deny they avoid facts, but in practice, they generally do avoid apologetic talking points. I had a conversation online with an individual who wanted to have an SE conversation, who said that Jesus is not God. And I wanted to go into the details of Scripture that showed clearly where it says Jesus is God, or Jesus equates himself with God, or Jesus is equated or equal with God. But the individual I was talking to did not want to go into the details of Scripture. It varies from SEP to SEP, but this is precisely what is outlined in two of Boghossian's books and in Loftus's book. In fact, Loftus uses the same quote Boghossian does about avoiding facts when discussing faith with believers. Here is Loftus's outsider test for faith. This is found on page 64 of the book. That's the quote in question. You can pause the video and read it if you'd like. It's the same quote Boghossian uses in A Manual for Creating Atheists. Here it is. And in Boghossian's book, you see the subtitle, Avoid Facts. And there's the quote that you find in Loftus's book as well. This is also in Boghossian's A Manual for Creating Atheists on the top of page 72. When I teach beginning street epistemologists how to help rid the faithful of their affliction and anchor their beliefs in reality, one of the most difficult strategies to get across is, do not bring particular pieces of evidence, facts, data points, into the discussion when attempting to disabuse people of specific faith propositions. This comes from Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay's 2019 book, How to Have Impossible Conversations. They say, quote, do not turn conversations into debates by giving your conversation partner a reason to defend her beliefs. This is especially true if your goal is to instill doubt. That's found on page 103. So to me, it's unclear why SCPs are frustrated about being criticized for this. It is in their books.
Is it the avoid facts argument?
Yeah.
Could we end this once and for all? Could we address this, please, finally? How many times do we have to keep talking about this? Yeah. I can't. I just can't. Somebody else, please.
Can someone repeat the argument, please? What's the argument?
Yeah, it was a little vague, honestly. That clip didn't really live up to what we typed. So what's the argument, Reed?
As he wants to avoid facts, not go into the details, the nitty-gritty of any type of nuance or argument. They're accusing us of wanting to stay abstract and vague and merely potentially just focus on epistemology. of, those broad things rather than the nuance and the nitty-gritty of arguments.
So in my criticisms of SE, I've asked myself, what makes street epistemology street epistemology? Is it the Socratic method? Is it civil-friendly conversation, critical thinking, psychology, formal philosophy, formal epistemology, or science? And as I was thinking about all this, you realize that you don't need street epistemology. And as I was thinking about this, it's clear that you don't need street epistemology to practice any of those things. They've been around a lot longer and have been used a lot longer than street epistemology has been in practice. Street epistemology is not backed by any formal discipline. Street epistemology has largely been defined by Peter Boghossian and Anthony Magnabosco. Atheism began SE. Atheism sustains SE. Atheism, I think, will be SE's demise. But when it comes to engaging believers, so here is what I think the common SE script you'll hear used with believers. What's the main reason you believe? How confident are you and why? How have you tested your beliefs? If you can't test your beliefs, should you really be so confident about them? What about Hindus or Muslims? How do you know your beliefs aren't wishful thinking? Do you really think faith is a reliable way to know if God exists? And the avoidance of facts, apologetic talking points, and details of one's belief in God. If you'd like to see more details about my idea of the SE script with believers, you can check out these two videos on my YouTube channel. I'll link them in the description notes below. Is Street Epistemology Scripted? And 11 Common Street Epistemology Tactics and Lines. So just a few observations I've had from criticizing street epistemology. One, be aware of the date. If you criticize something from even a couple of years ago, SEPs will tell you SE is constantly evolving, kind of as a way to avoid criticism. Well, we've moved past that. We don't really do that anymore. But there is a constant ambiguity about what they've moved past. But in my criticisms, when I've tried to be specific, people say street epistemology is constantly evolving. We don't just talk about religion anymore. They will say that they have no pope and there are no rules, but yet there is an executive director and a president of Street Epistemology International, Anthony and Reed, who are making executive decisions about the definitions of street epistemology. They are currently working on modules that will more detail the definitions and usages of street epistemology. And module 1 is coming soon, I hear. It will more clearly outline and define what they think street epistemology is. But currently, SEPs widely differ on what SE is and is not. If you talk to two different street epistemologists, you may get two different interpretations of what they think street epistemology is and is not, especially if you are being critical of it. SE's ideological relationship with Boghossian and Loftus, though, is clearly seen in practice, and that's what this video is about, that the atheism that drives street epistemology clearly comes out in practice when engaging with theists. So if you go into a street epistemology conversation, do so with eyes wide open. Be aware of the lines and tactics that you may hear. When some have tried an SE conversation with me, and this happens mostly online, not knowing what I know about it, I will at some point tell them I know what they're doing. The person will then tell me I wasn't actually doing SE with you, or they will accuse me of being unwilling to have a conversation, of being dishonest, or even recently I was called paranoid by someone. I have been accused of being a terrible witness for Jesus, which is a criticism I tend to agree with, unfortunately. I have been told I'm not genuinely interested in street epistemology, and Anthony himself has suggested my criticisms of SE are possibly hiding the fact that I have no good reasons for my faith in Christ.
The resistance that I see to what we're doing, it surprises me, it shocks me, and it saddens me. It really does. And I think it belays the realization that you don't have a good reason for thinking that this is true. And you've created this other stuff to just deflect.
So if you do attempt to be critical of street epistemology, be aware that it may become personal at some point. There are very few street epistemology interviews on video conducted with scholarly, credentialed Christian philosophers, apologists, or pastors. Most SE conversations with believers I've seen are ones with people on the street who have little or no idea what SE is about and are not prepared to go into a formal debate explaining their faith. There are few atheists questioning atheist SE conversations. There are a few, but the atheist SEPs tend to be quite soft on their atheist interlocutors. So if you practice SE and you believe it's about critical thinking, apply that critical thinking and skepticism to street epistemology itself.
The framing from Capturing Christianity here is that it's atheists versus theists. This is what street epistemology is about.
For fuck's sakes, come on.
This is
Still
rubbish.
to this day,
This
it's
is what I'm talking
2021.
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about.
Any epistemically humble, curious, wanting to be, up their rationality game, human being is welcome to learn and practice and develop street epistemology. This is, theism, atheism, it doesn't even register as like anything interesting to me.
Right. You can be on the board of directors for Street Epistemology International and think that there's a God. That it's not a requirement.
Yeah.
And we have all sorts of denominations, like at the Australia Friendly event, we got a Jehovah's Witness guy who has a PhD who is awesome. Fuzz the cat. He's very polite. He engages in SE. He really likes it because he wants to be challenged and he wants to explore if his justification is right. So he's very honest. We get all sorts. We got Luke. He's a Catholic.
Hey, maybe this is the start of a movement to get more theists. Or we don't care where you stand on any claim. We want you to learn the tool. We make these videos and tools freely accessible to everybody. There's not a pre-check.
I would love
and we're developing a course for everybody. We've invited everyone that we can possibly contact to help us test the course.
And I would love an SE to practice. I'd love a theist to practice SE on me. I would find it really interesting. Fascinating.
A theist, listen, a theist would probably be better at doing SE on any of the six of us than any of us because we are biased. And it shouldn't be the case, but you can't account for all of your biases and be as neutral as you want to be. So it's imperative that we get people or encourage people to learn the tool, regardless of where you stand on any claim. So we have a diversity of practitioners. The diversity of practitioners in SE is what's going to make this better and stronger. So we welcome you.